Welcome back to the Explainer. So, today we're getting into the actual physical reality of optimal performance. We all know that absolutely magical feeling of being utterly absorbed in a task, right? Where time just kind of vanishes and everything clicks. But we aren't just going to talk about how flow feels today. We are popping the hood. We're taking a super deep dive into how our brains literally manufacture this state, traveling all the way from human psychology right down to the microscopic neurochemistry of our synapses. Think about the very last time you were truly, completely in the zone. What is actually happening to your brain in that exact fraction of a second? It's a beautifully abstract feeling for sure, but as we'll see in the source material today, there are incredibly concrete, hard neuroscientific answers to that exact question. Let's get right into it. So here is our roadmap for today. First, the autotelic personality. Then, transient hypofrontality. Third, dopamine and signal to noise. Fourth, the LCNE exploitation mode. And finally, number 5, the dialectics of flow. All right, section 1, the autotelic personality. The renowned psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi actually gave us this concept of the autotelic personality. And basically, this describes a type of person who is just wired with a really strong disposition to actively seek out challenges. These folks are characterized by intense curiosity, serious persistence, and this really fascinating capacity for what Csikszentmihalyi called disinterested interest, which just means they possess both the psychological hunger to go out and find difficulty and the self-regulatory ability to actually stick around and master it. What's super interesting here is when you look at the literal root of the word. Auto means self, and telos means goal. So for an autotelic person, the activity itself is the entire point. They're doing the thing just for the sake of doing the thing, not to get some external reward down the line. The execution of the task is literally the reward. And that brings us to this really beautiful dialectical contrast. You see, the hallmark of the autotelic personality is this ability to manage a rewarding balance between two things. On one hand, you have the receptive openness of playing, just exploring to find new challenges. On the other hand, you have the highly active, incredibly focused work of actually building skills. It's this dynamic, constant tension between exploring and persisting that paves the absolute perfect psychological runway for flow. So how does this build into our neural architecture? Well, let's look at section 2, transient hypofrontality. We are zooming right into the brain's cortical networks now to uncover a bit of a paradox, because it turns out that peak performance is physically achieved by turning things off. Your brain essentially runs two parallel systems. You've got the explicit system. This is your analytical, highly conscious, slower system, seated right there in the frontal lobes. Then you have the implicit system. This one is skill-based, insanely fast, highly efficient, and it leans heavily on deep structures like the basal ganglia. Now, to achieve flow, you actually need your highly practiced implicit system to just run completely on autopilot. You need the explicit system to stop jumping in, stop micromanaging, and stop second-guessing every single move. Which brings us to a really groundbreaking idea proposed by Arne Dietrich back in 2004, transient hypofrontality. Now, hypo just means less, and frontality refers to your prefrontal cortex. Dietrich's hypothesis is that a core prerequisite for flow is literally the temporary quieting down of that explicit, conscious brain. When those analytical, self-monitoring regions in your prefrontal cortex take a quick nap, it basically mutes all our self-critical thoughts and lets us completely immerse ourselves in the task at hand. And recent fMRI scans have actually confirmed this massive neural reconfiguration. When you're in flow, we see a heavy suppression of what's called the default mode network, or DMN. That's the network that drives mind-wandering and self-monitoring. We also see decreased amygdala activity, meaning lower anxiety and negative arousal. But at the exact same time, there's a massive spike in the engagement of the executive control network, the ECN. This is what securely locks in your laser-focused attention. So the explicit self completely steps out of the way, but your executive attention stays razor-sharp. Moving into section 3, dopamine and signal to noise. Okay, resuming in even further now. Let's go all the way down to the microscopic synaptic level to figure out exactly how our neurochemistry sustains this perfect focus. Research by Kroner and colleagues demonstrated something absolutely wild: an optimal intermediate concentration of dopamine, which was specifically around 100 nanomolar in their study, directly increases the amplitude of excitatory synaptic inputs. It actively enhances a mechanism neuroscientists call EPSP spike coupling. Now, if that sounds like a bunch of jargon, just think about it like tuning an old school radio. Dopamine is literally the tuning dial. If your dopamine levels are too low, you just get static, meaningless background noise. But when you dial in the absolutely optimal amount of dopamine, it boosts the music, your target signal, while simultaneously completely muting the static. It is physically increasing the signal-to-noise ratio right there in your prefrontal cortex. The really crucial takeaway here is that this whole mechanism operates on an inverted U-curve. The research specifically notes that dopamine modulation follows an inverted U-shaped dose-response curve, meaning you get optimal signal processing right at the peak. If you have way too much dopamine, you end up overstimulated and jittery, too little, and you're just totally bored. But if you hit that exact precise peak of the curve, boom, you've just created the ultimate neurochemical home for flow. Next up, Section 4, the LCNE exploitation mode. We have to introduce another major player here, the locus coeruleus norepinephrine system, or LCNE for short. This is essentially the brain's primary engine for regulating your physiological arousal and how engaged you are with the task. Now, according to Aston Jones and Cohen's integrative theory, the LCNE system operates in 3 basic modes depending on its background arousal level. First is the disengagement mode, low norepinephrine, leaving you feeling bored and groggy. Then there's the exploration mode, baseline is way too high, making you super distractible and overloaded. But right in the middle, that is the exploitation mode. This intermediate baseline allows for massive, sustained bursts of focus when a task is really rewarding. This right here is literally the physiological sweet spot of optimal flow. And look at that. Once again, we see the exact same central motif, the inverted U-curve. Just like with dopamine, intermediate levels of arousal and norepinephrine are what lock us into task exploitation. And researchers can actually track this happening in real time just by measuring pupil dilation, because your pupils essentially mirror LC and NE activity. When that effort to reward ratio hits the sweet spot, your pupils dilate appropriately, your arousal is completely optimized, and you are entirely, undeniably locked in. Finally, Section 5, the dialectics of flow. Let's zoom all the way back out to the macro level. Achieving flow isn't just some lucky accident. It requires a real dialectical harmony. On one side of the equation, you have the need for flow. This is that psychological drive, the achievement motive to go out and tackle difficult things. But on the other side, you need the ability for flow, which is the physical, neurobiological capacity to self-regulate, to actually shut down that default mode network, and to master the challenge in front of you. So just to summarize this amazing macro to micro journey we've taken through the source material today, the actual architecture of optimal performance happens in 3 steps. Step 1, at the behavioral level, you have to balance a high challenge with a high level of skill. Step 2, at the network level, you achieve transient hypofrontality, letting your explicit conscious brain quiet down so your implicit neural system can just take the wheel. And step 3, down at the microscopic level, your dopamine and norepinephrine systems have to perfectly hit the peak of their inverted U-curves, beautifully tuning your synaptic signal-to-noise ratio. Understanding flow is great, but it isn't just about admiring the science, it's about what we do with it. Knowing that flow is a real, measurable physical state defined by specific dopamine peaks, precise arousal levels, and a quieted frontal lobe gives us an actionable roadmap. So I'll leave you with this. How are you going to manipulate your own signal-to-noise ratio in your daily work tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep seeking that optimal challenge.